Hey, friends. Some of these stories sound like a comedy sketch, but they happened in the White House.
Turns out, running the country doesn't require genius, just confidence and access to bad ideas. 1. Andrew Jackson's White House Rager. When Andrew Jackson threw his inauguration party in 1829, he wanted it to be for the people. He forgot that the people often show up drunk and looking for free stuff. Thousands stormed the White House like it was Black Friday at Walmart. They trampled carpets, smashed china, and climbed on furniture to get closer to the new president, who eventually had to escape through a window. The solution? Staff lured the mob outside by placing barrels of whiskey punch on the lawn like bait. It worked. America's first presidential evacuation was basically solved with an open bar. Jackson's legacy? A populist who turned democracy into a frat party. 2. Richard Nixon and the secret sandwiches. Richard Nixon was a man of mystery, paranoia, and weird eating habits. His favorite snack wasn't caviar or steak, it was cottage cheese topped with ketchup. He ate it daily, sometimes with pineapple, because he thought it made him look humble. This was the same guy secretly recording everyone in the White House. Picture it. A president who could wiretap a nation but couldn't figure out flavor. Even the kitchen staff begged him to stop mixing dairy and tomato paste, but Nixon persisted. When asked why, he said it reminded him of home. Apparently, home tasted like regret and poor life choices. 3. Calvin Coolidge's mechanical horse obsession. Calvin Coolidge, known as Silent Cal, wasn't big on conversation, but he was very big on mechanical horses. Yes, in the 1920s, he installed a motorized riding machine in the White House so he could exercise without leaving his room. Every morning, the President of the United States would bounce up and down on this robot pony while wearing a full suit and tie. He loved it so much he ordered 2 more, one for the White House and another for his summer home. Visitors could hear the rhythmic clunk-clunk through the halls while Coolidge calmly rode his fake horse like it was part of national security. If Peloton existed back then, he'd probably have declared it a cabinet position. 4. Thomas Jefferson's pet moose problem. Thomas Jefferson wasn't content with writing the Declaration of Independence. He also wanted to win an argument with France. A French naturalist had claimed that American animals were smaller and weaker than Europe's. Jefferson, deeply offended on behalf of national squirrels everywhere, decided to prove him wrong. His solution? Send a moose. Yes, a full-size dead moose. Jefferson had it hunted, stuffed, and shipped across the Atlantic to Paris like an oversized Amazon return. The journey took weeks, and by the time it arrived, the majestic American moose had decomposed into something that looked more like a swamp monster. The French scientist was not impressed. Jefferson had spent months and a small fortune just to lose an argument about animal size, and stink up a Parisian museum in the process. That's dedication to patriotism and poor logistics. 5. Abraham Lincoln's top hat filing cabinet. Lincoln wasn't just known for his honesty, he was also famous for his terrible filing system. The tall stovepipe hat he wore everywhere? That wasn't just for style, he used it as storage. Lincoln literally stuffed letters, notes, and speeches inside it like a mobile glove compartment. If you ever wondered how a president remembered his talking points, the answer is, with headgear. There's a story that he once pulled a folded letter from his hat mid-meeting, as if performing presidential magic. His aides called it eccentric, others called it practical. Either way, the man who freed the slaves and led the Union apparently couldn't be bothered to buy a briefcase. Somewhere, a 19th century secretary was quietly screaming into her quill. 6. Lyndon B. Johnson's Oval Office jacuzzi diplomacy. When Lyndon Johnson became president, he didn't just want to pass laws, he wanted bubbles. He installed a high-powered jacuzzi in the White House bathroom, complete with underwater jets and phone lines so he could take calls mid-soak. Picture it. The leader of the free world conducting official business while shirtless, yelling legislative orders over the sound of gurgling water. He even invited congressmen into the tub to talk policy, which might explain why half of them suddenly preferred written memos. LBJ once bragged that his jacuzzi was strong enough to blow the hide off a mule. It's unclear who tested that theory, but we can only hope it wasn't a staffer. Forget backroom deals. This was the birth of bathtub diplomacy. 7. John Quincy Adams' nude morning routine. John Quincy Adams had a daily ritual that would have broken Twitter. He liked to skinny dip in the Potomac River at dawn. Every morning before breakfast or official meetings, the President of the United States would strip completely naked and go for a brisk swim in public water. He called it refreshing. The Secret Service probably called it a heart attack waiting to happen. Once, a female journalist named Anne Royale actually sat on his clothes on shore and refused to move until he agreed to an interview, making her the first woman in U.S. history to corner a president while he was literally cornered. Adams later claimed it helped clear his mind. The rest of Washington just hoped it helped him stay downstream. 8. Jimmy Carter's Killer Bunny Incident. In 1979, Jimmy Carter faced one of the strangest presidential crises ever recorded, an attack from a swamp rabbit. While fishing in Georgia, Carter saw a large, wet rabbit swimming straight toward his boat. Instead of hopping away, the creature charged at him, teeth bared, eyes wild, paddling like a furry torpedo. Carter tried to shoo it off with an oar, and the event was immortalized by the press as the Killer Rabbit Incident. When reporters heard the story, they laughed it off, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. The White House even released a photo showing Carter fending off his amphibious attacker. The Cold War was raging, inflation was climbing, and the President of the United States was outwitted by a homicidal bunny. History will never let him live it down. 9. Teddy Roosevelt's bulletproof speech. Teddy Roosevelt wasn't just tough, he was practically bulletproof. In 1912, while campaigning for president, a would-be assassin shot him in the chest at point-blank range. Most people would have dropped instantly. Teddy didn't. He coughed into his hand, saw there was no blood from his lungs, and decided that meant he could finish his speech. The bullet had been slowed by his folded 50-page speech and a metal glasses case in his pocket. Bleeding and winded, he stood before a crowd and declared, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." Then he spoke for 90 minutes, with a bullet still lodged in his ribs. He only went to the hospital afterward reluctantly because apparently fainting was for less manly mammals. The doctors left the bullet inside him for life. Teddy called it a souvenir. The audience called it insane. Both were correct. 10. William Howard Taft and the Bathtub Emergency Taft, our heaviest president at over 300 pounds, is famous for one legend, getting stuck in the White House bathtub. And while historians debate the exact details, here's what's true. Taft did, in fact, order an enormous custom tub after a small plumbing incident. The new one was 7 feet long and wide enough to fit 4 grown men, which, coincidentally, is how many workers were needed to lift him out of the old one. When the oversized porcelain monument arrived, Taft proudly posed for photos with it like it was a new car. Newspapers joked that it could double as a naval vessel. It eventually became a national symbol of self-awareness, a president literally reshaping the White House for comfort. Somewhere, an architect sighed and drew up blueprints labeled Emergency Exit, Presidential Bathtub Edition. 11. Herbert Hoover's 3 a.m. orchestra problem. During his time in the White House, Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou were obsessed with music, to the point of driving the staff insane. They had a private Marine band orchestra that played live concerts for them several nights a week. But Hoover had insomnia. His solution? Midnight and 3 a.m. jam sessions. The First Lady would ring the bell, and the poor musicians had to stumble out of bed to play waltzes while the president sat half awake in his robe, sipping tea. Imagine trying to hit perfect trumpet notes while your boss looks like a haunted librarian. Hoover called it relaxing. The musicians called it hell. When reporters asked why the band looked so exhausted at public events, one allegedly replied, "We've been jazzed into oblivion by democracy," a fitting metaphor for his entire presidency. 12. Franklin D. Roosevelt's secret pancake obsession. Franklin D. Roosevelt projected confidence, authority, and calm leadership. But behind closed doors, he had a serious pancake addiction. He insisted on making them himself, using a secret recipe that included molasses, cornmeal, and a dangerous disregard for portion sizes. Every Sunday, the leader of the free world would flip dozens of pancakes for guests, proudly serving them while lecturing about the perfect flip velocity. Once, he even delayed a meeting with Winston Churchill because, as he reportedly said, "The batter isn't ready." Churchill didn't mind. He loved pancakes too. The press never mentioned it, but White House insiders knew the truth. FDR didn't run on politics or power. He ran on carbohydrates. You could say the New Deal was fueled by maple syrup and pure confidence. 13. John F. Kennedy's Coconut Rescue Note. Before JFK became president, he was a young Navy officer commanding a patrol boat in World War II. After his ship was sunk by a Japanese destroyer, Kennedy led his surviving crew to a deserted island. With no radio, food, or water, he did what any future president would do: carved a distress message into a coconut shell. He handed it to two locals, who paddled for miles to deliver it. The message worked, and his men were rescued. Kennedy kept that coconut on his desk in the Oval Office as a paperweight, a small reminder that good handwriting can save lives. The same guy who charmed Marilyn Monroe once literally sent a coconut text message to survive. And that's how America got its most tropical presidential souvenir. 14. Ulysses S. Grant's speeding arrest. Even when you're president, you're not above the law, especially if your horse is speeding. In 1872, Ulysses S. Grant was pulled over in Washington, D.C. for racing his horse-drawn carriage too fast down the street. The officer, unaware of who he was, lectured him about endangering pedestrians. When Grant sheepishly revealed his identity, the cop didn't back down. He arrested him anyway. The President of the United States had to walk home while his horse was impounded. The next day, Grant paid his fine in full, reportedly tipping his hat to the officer for doing his duty. Somewhere, every traffic cop in America shed a patriotic tear. It remains the only known case of a U.S. president literally getting a speeding ticket from a horse cop, proving that power can't outrun common sense. 15. Harry Truman's piano disaster. Harry Truman loved two things: blunt honesty and piano playing. Unfortunately, one of those nearly destroyed the White House. During a family concert in 1948, Truman was pounding out a tune in the upstairs sitting room when the entire piano leg crashed through the floor. Staff discovered the century-old floorboards were rotting, and the whole mansion was on the verge of collapse. Engineers soon declared the structure unsafe, forcing a complete rebuild. Truman had essentially played the White House into a full renovation. He joked that it was the most expensive encore in history. They rebuilt it from the ground up, but the lesson was clear. When a president says he's going to shake up Washington, sometimes he means it literally. 16. George Washington's whiskey empire, America's first president, didn't just win wars and wear powdered wigs, he also became one of the nation's biggest booze dealers. After leaving office, George Washington opened a whiskey distillery at Mount Vernon, producing nearly 11,000 gallons a year. He didn't even drink much himself, but he knew the math. Soldiers and farmers loved whiskey more than taxes. Ironically, this was the same man who once sent troops to crush the Whiskey Rebellion, then turned around and built his own distillery. The founding father of moral contradictions also became the founding father of American capitalism. His whiskey was so strong it was described as potent enough to convince Congress. To this day, Mount Vernon still sells bottles made from his recipe, proving Washington's spirit lives on, literally. 17. Bill Clinton's saxophone diplomacy. Before he was shaking hands in the Oval Office, Bill Clinton was shaking hips on late-night TV. In 1992, during his campaign, he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show wearing sunglasses and playing Heartbreak Hotel on the saxophone. The crowd went wild. America suddenly had a president who looked less like a politician and more like the coolest band teacher ever. Political analysts called it a PR stunt. Clinton called it jamming for democracy. The performance helped him connect with younger voters and basically turned the sax into a campaign slogan. Later, he even played at official events, sometimes to the discomfort of world leaders who weren't ready for impromptu jazz solos at diplomatic dinners. Somewhere, an aide probably whispered, "Sir, please stop serenading the Prime Minister." But Clinton didn't care. The man ran the country like it had a permanent house band. 18. Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program. Literally, Ronald Reagan loved movies, so much that he tried to turn one into government policy. In the 1980s, he announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a missile defense system so ambitious the press immediately nicknamed it Star Wars. The idea was to shoot down Soviet nukes from space using futuristic laser satellites. The problem? None of that technology existed. Scientists politely explained that Reagan's plan was basically science fiction. But Reagan, a former Hollywood actor, wasn't discouraged. He said America could dream big. Billions were spent developing orbital laser concepts that looked suspiciously like props from Flash Gordon. The Soviet Union panicked anyway, which kind of made the whole thing work. Reagan accidentally bluffed an empire into bankruptcy using what was essentially a movie pitch. Not bad for a guy who once co-starred with a chimpanzee. 19. Grover Cleveland's secret jaw surgery. In 1893, President Grover Cleveland disappeared for 4 days during a national financial panic. Rumors flew. Had he fled the country? Been kidnapped? Nope. He was on a yacht having emergency jaw surgery to remove a cancerous tumor. In secret. The operation took place in the middle of Long Island Sound to keep the press away. Surgeons removed part of his upper jaw and replaced it with a rubber prosthetic, all while the country thought he was on a fishing trip. The cover-up worked for decades. When the truth finally came out, people were shocked to learn the president had literally sailed off to have his face remodeled. Cleveland later joked about it, calling it a minor inconvenience. The doctors called it a miracle. The Secret Service probably called it a logistical nightmare. 20. Dwight Eisenhower's UFO obsession. In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower mysteriously vanished for one night while vacationing in Palm Springs. The White House claimed he'd chipped a tooth. UFO enthusiasts have spent 70 years claiming otherwise, that Eisenhower met with aliens. The story goes that he supposedly slipped away to Edwards Air Force Base to sign an interplanetary peace agreement. There's zero proof, of course, but the rumor refuses to die. It got so intense that reporters cornered his press secretary, who had to insist the president was not, in fact, engaged in extraterrestrial diplomacy. Still, Ike did love his sci-fi. He even ordered the first U.S. satellite launch a few years later, which didn't help his case. Whether it was dental work or diplomacy with E.T., one thing's certain: Eisenhower became the first president accused of having truly out-of-this-world meetings. 21. James Madison's tiny presidential problem. James Madison might have written the Constitution, but he definitely didn't look like the guy on the money. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches and weighing barely 100 pounds, he was the smallest U.S. president. Physically, not historically. Foreign diplomats reportedly mistook him for an assistant until he started speaking fluent French about liberty. His wife Dolly often had to boost his image, literally, by hosting massive parties and towering social events. During the War of 1812, when the British invaded Washington, Madison's staff had to lift him onto a horse because the stirrups were too high. Yet, the man packed more political power per square inch than anyone before or after. Madison proved you didn't need height to stand tall in history, just a constitution and nerves of steel. 22. George W. Bush's Pretzel War. In 2002, the commander-in-chief faced an unexpected enemy, a pretzel. While watching football in the White House, George W. Bush reportedly choked on a pretzel, fainted, and fell off the couch. The Secret Service rushed in, ready for a national emergency, only to find their president defeated by a salty snack. He later appeared on TV with a bruised cheek, joking that he'd learned to chew more carefully. It became the most American story ever told, a Texas rancher who could survive global crises but not a hard-baked carb. The incident even caused a spike in pretzel sales, because apparently people wanted to snack like the president, minus the concussion. To this day, Bush's medical record includes the line, "Loss of consciousness due to pretzel." Historians will probably file it under snack-related leadership challenges. 23. Benjamin Harrison's electricity fear. Benjamin Harrison was the first president to live in a White House wired with electricity, and he was terrified of it. The technology was so new in the 1890s that Harrison believed flipping a light switch could electrocute him. So instead of turning lights on or off, he'd simply leave them burning all night. The White House glowed like a haunted house while the president hid from the light bulbs he'd installed. His servants were equally frightened, so they'd all just quietly avoid touching anything electric. Rumor has it Harrison once sat in the dark for hours rather than risk turning off a lamp. So while Edison was lighting up the nation, the leader of the free world was too scared to touch his own wall. The man who commanded armies lost a battle to a light switch, and the switch won. 24. Barack Obama's secret comics addiction. Barack Obama was known for his composure, eloquence, and cool demeanor. But behind that presidential calm was a massive comic book nerd. Growing up, he collected Spider-Man and Conan the Barbarian comics and never outgrew them. As president, he invited Marvel artists to the White House, quoted superheroes in speeches, and even appeared on the cover of Amazing Spider-Man number 583, where Spidey literally fist-bumped him. When asked about it, Obama said he liked the idea of heroes who use brains before fists. Of course, Secret Service agents weren't thrilled about the whole radioactive spider imagery, but America loved it. He became the first president officially recognized as a comic book character, a moment that blurred the line between Marvel Universe and Capitol Hill. Somewhere in a parallel dimension, there's probably a crossover titled The Audacity of Hope, the Infinity Gauntlet Edition. 25. Chester A. Arthur's Furniture Fire Sale. When Chester A. Arthur moved into the White House in 1881, he took one look at the decor and decided it was, in his words, hideous. His solution? He sold nearly every stick of presidential furniture at auction, including priceless antiques and relics dating back to George Washington. Collectors bought them up cheap, thinking they were getting ordinary old chairs, not literal pieces of American history. Then Arthur spent taxpayer money redecorating with marble fireplaces, velvet drapes, and Tiffany glass. The press roasted him for turning the White House into a Victorian showroom, but Arthur shrugged. He claimed he was bringing elegance back to government. Somewhere, Washington's ghost probably muttered, "You burned my chair for drapes?" The man may not have been a visionary leader, but he sure knew how to host a glamorous seance. 26. Gerald Ford's Gravity Problem. Gerald Ford was an athlete, a former football star in fact. Yet as president, he became famous for tripping. Constantly. He once fell down the stairs of Air Force One, stumbled on the South Lawn, and even managed to collide with a waiter at a state dinner. Comedians called him the President of Gravity. Secret Service agents started walking closer, just in case the floor decided to attack again. Ford took it all in stride, literally. When a reporter asked about his coordination, he replied, "I just keep falling forward." His good humor made the gaffes charming, but history never forgot. To this day, he remains the only U.S. president who could turn walking into a full-contact sport. You could say he brought slapstick comedy to the Oval Office, one step at a time. 27. Joe Biden's ice cream diplomacy. Every president has a comfort food. For Joe Biden, it's ice cream, to the point of obsession. He's been photographed with cones at campaign stops, summits, even press conferences. Once, during a global meeting, he reportedly delayed an exit just to grab a double scoop of chocolate chip. The Secret Service actually had to plan dessert-friendly routes during his 2020 campaign. When asked about it, Biden said, "I don't drink, I don't smoke, but I love ice cream." In fact, Ben & Jerry's once gifted him an industrial-sized freezer of his favorite flavor. Political aides learned early on, if you want the president's full attention, bring dessert. It's not diplomacy, it's Dairy Queen strategy, proving that world peace might just start with sprinkles and a waffle cone. So there you have it. From bathtub battles to killer rabbits, America's leaders have done it all. If aliens ever ask what kind of people run this country, just show them the guy who fought a pretzel and lost. Which one's your favorite presidential disaster? Tell me below. And remember, history isn't written by the winners. It's written by the weirdos who brought moose carcasses, jacuzzi meetings, and ice cream cones to the Oval Office.